Islam has been part of the American religious fabric since the very beginning of the settlers' arrival in the New World, as many Africans were brought over during the early years of America's founding. The issue of slavery in the modern era is tied to the discovery of the New World America, where enslaved laborers purchased from African slave traders were subjected to forced labor on plantations in the new American colonies starting in the early 17th century. From the very beginning of European settlement in North America, Islam was part of the religious landscape. African Muslims, alongside others who arrived in the new lands, contributed to building America, from mapping its borders to fighting against British rule. Muslims first came to North America in the 16th century as part of colonial expeditions. One such explorer was Mustafa al-Azmouri, also known as Estevanico, considered both the first Muslim and the first African to reach the New World. The Portuguese sold Mustafa to a Spanish nobleman, and in 1527 he was taken aboard a Spanish expedition to establish a colony in Florida. He was one of only 4 survivors of that journey and is regarded as one of the discoverers of New Mexico and the American Southwest. It is believed he died in a Native American town after nearly a decade of exploratory travels. The War of Independence African Muslims also fought alongside settlers during the Revolutionary War for Independence, 1775 and 1783. Military records list many men with Muslim names, including Bampit Muhammad and Yusuf ben Ali, also known as Joseph ben Hali. Others appear in muster rolls with names believed to be linked to Muslims, such as Salem Poor. They were keen to distinguish themselves on the battlefield. America's founding fathers were aware of the presence of Muslims in the new nation. Thomas Jefferson owned a copy of the Quran and mentioned Islam in several of his early writings and political essays. In his campaign for religious freedom in Virginia, Jefferson argued in support of the proposed Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, saying that neither pagan nor Mohammedan, Muslim nor Jew ought to be excluded from the civil rights of the Commonwealth because of his religion. The phrasing was later amended, and references to non-Christian groups were removed before ratification. Jefferson was not the only statesman to acknowledge non-Christian religions. However, theoretical awareness and openness toward Islam did not prevent the continued enslavement of African Muslims, many of whom participated in the abolitionist movement and later served as Union soldiers during the Civil War. Slaves, not citizens. In the early years of America's founding, the vast majority of Muslims were not citizens but enslaved people brought from African countries. Estimates of their numbers across the Americas range from tens of thousands to as many as 3 million. Many enslaved Muslims were educated, and according to historians, a significant number were literate in Arabic. Many also held leadership positions within the system of forced labor on southern plantations. Because of their literacy, numeracy, and professional backgrounds, many enslaved African Muslims worked in accounting, domestic service, and security. This gave them closer contact with white society, and some managed to earn money and eventually buy their freedom. They left behind numerous written accounts of their experiences in America in the form of letters and memoirs, many of them written in Arabic. These writings served both as a means of communication and as a form of resistance to slavery. They often contained Quranic verses calling for freedom, genealogical records, and promises of returning home to Africa, according to the National Museum of African American History and Culture. Historical records provide details about their names, clothing, religious practices, diet, and lifestyle, including prayer, the call to prayer, and almsgiving, evidence of their deep attachment to their faith in the early years. Over time, however, many converted to Christianity, or their children did so as part of assimilation into the new society. This helps explain the decline of Muslims in the 19th century, according to historian Ghanea Basiri, author of A History of Islam in America. In his article, Muslims in Early America, published in the Journal of Southern History, American scholar Michael Gomez notes that from the 16th century onward, many of the regions targeted by slave raiders were home to Muslim populations. He presents evidence from African history showing that a large proportion of those enslaved and transported across the Atlantic were Muslims. The brutal conditions imposed by slavers led to uprisings, including a 19th century revolt by Muslims along the Senegal River against enslavement. Gomez also traces Islam among enslaved people in North America through runaway slave advertisements, which often featured Muslim names such as Mustafa and Abu Bakr. A second wave. By the late 19th century, millions of immigrants began arriving on America's shores, with numbers increasing in the early 20th century. Among them were tens of thousands from Muslim-majority regions in the Middle East, South and Central Asia, and Eastern Europe, countries that sought the promises of the Industrial Revolution that took off after America emerged from the Civil War and Reconstruction era. Yet Muslims faced hostility from the start, particularly when practicing their faith. They encountered racist practices such as having dirt thrown at them while praying, being forced to wear Christian clothing, being denied the right to fast during Ramadan or to pray, and in some cases being compelled to hide their true beliefs and publicly convert. One account tells of an enslaved man who was rewarded with freedom after changing his religion, but upon returning to his homeland, he openly reaffirmed his original faith.